because they have the decency, they have the compassion to pray for those before them. And if there was no benefit in this, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not praise them at all. So this proves then that their asking for forgiveness does bring benefit to the deceased. And if it did not, then obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have commended them. From the sunnah, countless examples from the sayings and from the ahadith of the beloved Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. When a person passed away in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he would pray for them. He would do dua for them. Just a quick example of one Imam Muslim records in his Sahih. Allahumma ghfir lah. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgive the deceased. Warhamha, show mercy upon him. Wa'afih, show pardon him. Wa'afu anhu, forgive his sins. Wa'akrim nuzlahu, and show karam, show nobility on his final resting place. These are the kind of du'as that the Prophet would perform for the deceased. Hadith recorded by both Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. When a person came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that my mother unfortunately died quite suddenly, and I knew that if she had the opportunity to leave some wasiyyah, to leave some advice, she certainly would have done so. So can I make some donations on her behalf? Can I give some money, for example, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and dedicate the reward to her? The Prophet, in his very simple and a very clear answer, he said yes. And that's all we really need to know about on this topic, that the Prophet himself has given ijazah. That after this there are no further discussions on that. One could argue though, that this is charitable acts, nafli ibadat, and that Isaal Sawaab is only restricted to that only. But what we find is that the farz acts as well, the obligatory acts in Islam, sadaqah jariyah and Isaal Sawaab, is also permissible in these areas as well. And in the notes you will see examples of how people came to the Prophet and said that my relative or my father or someone hasn't performed Hajj yet. Can I perform Hajj on his behalf? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave ijazah for these people. The Prophet himself said that whoever passes away and did not complete the farz fast in the month of Ramadan, فَلْيَصُمْ وَلِيُّهُ, then his guardian, his legal heir, you could say, he is responsible for performing the fast on his behalf. So in farz ibadats as well, like fasting, like Hajj, the idea of Isaal Sawaab works. And certainly with this idea of charitable donations, nafli ibadat, it works as well. That there were examples when the companions would dedicate a well to provide water for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of those people who had passed before them. And then also, there's a famous example as we approach Eid al-Adha. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is from the notes of from the works of Imam Ahmad, that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed the Qurbani on the occasion of Eid al-Adha, he did so. A ram was brought to him and he said, Bismillahi Allahu Akbar, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is greatest. Then he said, oh Allah, this sacrifice is from myself, and this sacrifice is from the family of Muhammad, and this sacrifice is from the ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. So this idea of dedicating the reward to others is clearly proven, directly proven as the example and the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One point about that's the sunnah, one example from qiyas, and this is the easiest way to remember it, that Isaal Sawaab is jais. One example from the ijma, sorry, not qiyas, from the consensus, each and every generation of Muslims has agreed in the legitimacy and indeed the obligatory nature of Salatul Janazah, the prayer that we perform on the deceased. The Salatul Janazah is not really a salah, it's just a dua for the deceased. That's all it is. We are praying for the forgiveness of the deceased. There would be no point in this salah if the reward or the benefit did not get to the deceased. You know very well that the ideal dua is when you start with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you couple that with sending salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you do whichever dua you want. That is what you and I have been told. This is the perfect dua. Look at Salatul Janazah and you will see that's exactly what it is. You start with Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. What is this? Is the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after the takbir you read Durud Ibrahim upon the Prophet alayhi salam. And then after the next takbir, what do? You perform a dua. Allahumma ighfir li hayyina wa mayyitina. So what are you doing? You are just really just performing a dua. Why it's called a salah is because it resembles salah in a lot of ways. That you have to face the qibla, you have to be in wuzu, and so forth. But you know it differentiates from a conventional salah in the sense that there is no ruku' and that there is no sajda. And in a normal salah, if you miss that, then obviously your salah would not count. So the easiest way to remember this, the legitimacy of Isaal Sawaab, is Salatul Janazah. That this is nothing but a dua for those people who have passed away. And again, I'll give you a quote from Ibn Taymiyyah upon which will soon conclude. That the deceased, Ibn Taymiyyah was quoted to have said, the deceased benefits from the recitation of the Quran as well as from financial worships like sadaqah. So even Ibn Taymiyyah actually agrees with this. And then before we go into the objection, one possible objection on this, just a quote from Allama Sa'duddin Taftazani, who wrote a very famous book for our Dars Nizami student, Sharaqat Nasfiya, in which he quotes a beautiful hadith. And he says that the Prophet ﷺ said that when an alim and when a muta'allim, when a scholar and when a student of Islam, when they pass by a village, and this alim and these students are very pious and are very sincere in their endeavors towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just by passing by that village, what happens? Allah will remove the azab from the cemetery of that village for 40 days. So just by them passing by this village, the people of the qabr in that village, they will be relieved from punishment for 40 days. They are dead. They are in their graves, but they are benefiting just by the passing of these alims and by these muta'allims. So a clear indication of Isaal Sawaab from the sunnah of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. One objection upon we will conclude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran in Surah Najm, Laysa lil insani illa ma sa'a. That a man will only get what he himself strives for. That the effort he puts in, that's what he will get out. Nobody else's. So from this, seemingly, it suggests that a person will only benefit from his own good deeds, and that the efforts of others, those people around him, will not actually benefit him at all. This is the opinion of some Muslims in our religion. The answer to that, before we explain the answer, there is one famous hadith which I am sure you are all familiar with, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that when a person dies, his actions cease except for three things: sadaqah jariyah, that he continues to give; waladun salihun yad'u lah, a pious child who continues to pray for him; or knowledge which actually he disperses amongst people. So here the Prophet, this is the Quran, will say that a person will not get anything except what he himself has done. And then the Prophet said that when he gives sadaqah jariyah, when he has a pious child, or when he disperses knowledge, then this will benefit him after he has died. If you think about it, this does not actually contradict this verse at all. Why? Because by giving education to his child, and by giving the correct tarbiyah, and teaching him that you should pray for the forgiveness of those people who have passed away, you should pray for the forgiveness of your parents when you pass away, in reality, it was his work. It was his effort and not the actual child. He's the one that actually nurtured them and put it into his mind that you should be doing it. So it is his effort. By going around and giving knowledge to people, that was his own effort. This is something that he did in his own lifetime. And then because of the barakah and because of the blessings of that, it was there, it was sufficient to actually benefit after he had passed away as well. So it does not contradict the verse at all. By having the sense and by having the iman that I will give money to the mosque, this is something that he done when? In his own lifetime. He did it himself so that it benefits after him. So you will see that this verse does not actually contradict the idea of Isaal Sawaab. It actually supports it. It actually cements it. And to the extent that the ulama ikram say that just by a person, just by the virtue of becoming part of the Muslim ummah, by reading the kalima sharif, then now that gives him the right to be the recipient of the du'as of others. That's how powerful the kalima sharif is. That was your part, that was your effort. And it is so powerful, and it is so heavy in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that others will actually benefit from that. In detail in the notes, there are many opinions from the ulama ikram, the likes of Allama Taftazani. And inshallah ta'ala, from there you will totally understand and appreciate that the masla of Isaal Sawaab is not confusing at all. It's not something which has troubles our Muslims in any sense of the word whatsoever. Inshallah ta'ala, next week then, it will be a session on bid'ah, innovation. Rather like this week, we will begin with a clear definition of what bid'ah is in Arabic, literally. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam famously said, "Kullu bid'atin dalala," that every bid'ah is dalala, is misguidance. Anything new in religion is dalala, is something which is unpraiseworthy. Wa kullu dalala fin nar, and that every misguided thing will end up in the fire. So we will ask that do we take the words of the Prophet on face level, and that every new thing is bid'ah? And then from that, stemming from that, and from what the ulama ikram have mentioned, we will look at the different types of bid'ah. Bid'ah hasana, a good bid'ah, bid'ah sayyi'ah, unpraiseworthy bid'ah. Inshallah, that will take place next week at about 4 o'clock. If there's any question and answers, there are the two. Please do take the notes on the way out, and if you have missed any of the sessions, then in the back hall